12 months ago, Bill Maher sat across a dinner table from Donald Trump and told America the truth about what he saw. The man in that private room laughed genuinely, listened carefully, and never once pressed the comedian who had spent 2 decades calling him every unflattering name available in the English language. Maher came home and reported that the private Trump and the public Trump were 2 completely different men. And then, having said all of that, having absorbed the attacks from the left that followed, having watched Larry David write a satirical takedown in the New York Times about his willingness to break bread with the enemy, Bill Maher walked onto the real-time stage on April 24, 2026, looked into the camera, and delivered 5 seconds of television that left the President of the United States with nowhere to go. Hormuz is not open. The people did not do an uprising. The regime is still in place. We did not win. This is the full story of what those words mean, where they came from, and why they hit harder than anything a purely partisan comedian could have said. To understand what Maher said on that Friday night, you need to understand who he is across the full span of his career. Not the caricature that political convenience has constructed around him, but the actual record of a man who has been doing this work for 30 years without bending to what any particular side needed him to be. Bill Maher started Politically Incorrect in 1993. Real Time with Bill Maher debuted on HBO in 2003 and has now run for over 700 episodes. He has interviewed every significant American politician, journalist, intellectual, and celebrity of the last 3 decades. He lost a network show for being too honest after September 11th when he said something true that the corporate environment of the moment could not accommodate. He came back on HBO, which does not answer to the same pressures, and has been there ever since. He voted for Bob Dole in 1996. He supported the Iraq War in its early stages. He has broken with the Democratic Party more times than most people can count, and has done it in ways that cost him real social capital with audiences he could have retained by simply staying quiet. He refused to go along with the cancellation of Roseanne Barr. He refused to apologize for using a racial slur on his own show in 2017 when he believed the context required honesty over comfort. He has spent years criticizing the excesses of progressive culture at a moment when doing so from the left was a reliable way to get called a traitor by the very people who would otherwise have been his natural audience. He won the 2026 Mark Twain Prize for American Humor, the most prestigious award in American comedy, scheduled to be presented at the Kennedy Center on June 28th. The Trump White House initially called the award fake news. That detail tells you more about the current state of American political discourse than any analysis could. Bill Maher is a 69-year-old libertarian-leaning comedian who cannot be placed neatly on the standard political spectrum, which is precisely why what he says lands differently than what comes from the standard late-night machinery. He is not Jimmy Kimmel. He is not Stephen Colbert. He is not Trevor Noah. Those are all talented performers doing genuinely effective work, but they operate within a framework that Donald Trump and his supporters have learned to dismiss as predictable partisan entertainment. When Kimmel jokes about Trump, the response from the right is that Kimmel was always a liberal mouthpiece, and nothing he says should be taken seriously by anyone who does not already agree with him. When Colbert repeats convicted felon, the counter is that Colbert has hated Trump since day one and will say anything that damages him. That dismissal requires a category that Maher refuses to fit into. When Maher says Trump is dangerous, conservative-leaning independents pause and actually process the claim, because Maher has also spent significant time and energy criticizing the left's excesses in ways that demonstrate he is not simply performing for a predetermined audience. When Maher says Trump did not win the Iran confrontation, even Trump-friendly Republicans have to engage with the argument rather than filing it under partisan noise, because Maher is the same person who once gave Trump the most generous personal account any late-night host had offered in the entire modern era. That account, delivered on April 11, 2025, 12 days after Maher had actually sat down to dinner with Trump at a meeting arranged by Kid Rock, was the kind of honest reporting that created problems for everyone who needed the narrative to be simple. Maher told his real-time audience directly that Trump was gracious and measured. He said Trump laughed, genuinely, including at himself, and that it did not feel performed. He said he never felt he had to walk on eggshells. He said he could speak to Trump in ways he would never have felt comfortable speaking to Bill Clinton or Barack Obama. And then he delivered the line that conservative media circulated for months afterward, saying that everything he had ever not liked about Trump was, he swore to God, absent, at least on that specific night with that specific person. The left came at him hard. Larry David wrote the satirical attack piece. Social media processed it as betrayal. The words sellout, coward, and normalizer circulated widely, and Maher's response was consistent every time someone pushed him on it. He was not saying the private Trump was the real Trump. He was not saying the dinner conversation represented policy. He was saying he reported what he saw, that he was not high, and that it did not matter who Trump was at a private dinner with a comedian. What mattered was who he was on the world stage. The private generosity and the public record existed simultaneously, and acknowledging one did not require pretending the other was not real. That intellectual framework, the ability to hold two contradictory things in accurate focus at the same time, is what makes Maher's criticism of Trump structurally different from the criticism that comes from people who have never acknowledged anything positive about the man. When Maher attacks, the attack cannot be absorbed by the target and spat back out as evidence of pre-existing bias, because Maher has publicly generated goodwill with the target in a way that is part of the documented record. Which brings us to April 24, 2026. The Iran situation had been building for weeks, and Maher had been watching it with the specific attention of someone who understands military and foreign policy history well enough to ask the questions that are uncomfortable to ask when the national mood is running hot with patriotism and executive messaging. He had been pleading, in his own way, for the administration to find an exit from the conflict that did not require a manufactured victory narrative to sustain political support. He had watched the messaging from the White House describe the situation in terms that did not match what was actually happening in the Strait. He had seen the gap between the declared outcome and the observable reality grow wider with each official statement. And on Friday night, he said the thing that official channels were working very hard not to say. Hormuz is not open. The people did not do an uprising. The regime is still in place. We did not win. 5 sentences, no comedy setup, no satirical framing, no hyperbole or exaggeration designed to land a punchline. Just the journalistic verdict of a man who had been paying close enough attention to know what the facts were and who had established enough credibility across the political spectrum to say them without being immediately dismissed. Trump's response was predictable in the way that all Trump responses to things he cannot argue with are predictable. He attacked the messenger rather than engaging with the message. He went to Truth Social and attempted to frame Maher as nervous and scared, which is the characterization Trump deploys whenever he needs to seem dominant in an exchange that he is not actually winning. He tried to make the story about Maher's emotional state rather than about the status of the Strait of Hormuz, the Iranian government, or the gap between the administration's declared objectives and the actual outcomes on the ground. It did not work because Maher had not been emotional. He had been precise, and precision does not respond to attacks on the precision maker's psychological state. The Strait is either open or it is not. The regime is either still in place or it is not. Whether Maher was nervous or confident or comfortable or frightened when he said those words does not change whether the words are accurate, and the words were accurate, and everyone watching knew it. This is the specific quality that makes the Maher-Trump dynamic unlike any other late-night dynamic of this era. Trump has developed a remarkably effective immune system against criticism from sources he can categorize as enemies. Decades of practice have made him genuinely skilled at absorbing incoming fire from predictable directions and converting it into fuel for his own narrative. The fake news framework, the enemy of the people framing, the constant references to ratings and failure, all of it serves the function of creating a barrier between Trump and criticism by attacking the credibility of the critic before the audience ever has to engage with the content of what the critic is saying. Maher bypasses that immune system because he cannot be categorized. He is not the standard liberal late-night host who hated Trump from day one and will say anything to damage him. He is the comedian who had dinner with Trump, reported something positive about the experience, took the hits that came with that honesty, and then kept watching and kept telling the truth about what he saw. When Maher criticizes Trump's Iran narrative, the argument about the critic's motives leads back to a man who went out of his way to be fair, who paid a real social cost for that fairness, and who has a 30-year record of criticizing power regardless of which direction the power is flowing. Trump cannot make that go away. Trump cannot make Maher take back what he said on April 24th. And Trump cannot make the underlying facts about the Strait of Hormuz change by attacking a comedian's character on a social media platform. There is also a deeper lesson here about what political comedy is actually for, separate from the entertainment function it is most visibly serving. The standard argument about late-night political comedy is that it preaches to the choir, that it makes people who already agree with the comedian feel good about what they believe, and has minimal impact on anyone who does not already share that worldview. That argument has significant evidence behind it in the context of purely partisan comedy, telling confirmed Trump supporters that Trump is bad in increasingly creative ways, using increasingly sophisticated comedic techniques, does not change the minds of confirmed Trump supporters. But that is not what Maher is doing, and it is not what this moment represented. What Maher is doing is speaking to the people who are not confirmed anything, the people who voted for Trump in 2024 because they found the alternative less appealing, the people who support some of what the administration is doing while being genuinely uncertain about other parts of it, the people who would dismiss a Kimmel monologue as entertainment from someone they already know, disagrees with them, but who cannot so easily dismiss a 69-year-old libertarian comedian who sat down to dinner with the president and reported honestly on what he saw there. Those are the people for whom Maher's 5 sentences about Iran carry the most weight. Not the people who were already convinced, the people who were watching to see whether the official narrative matched the observable reality, and who now have a data point from a source they cannot categorize as a predetermined enemy. The broader picture that this story sits inside is one of a presidency navigating a week of extraordinary pressure from multiple directions simultaneously. The Caroline Leavitt situation, the White House correspondents' dinner security incident, the ongoing ABC and Disney confrontation over Jimmy Kimmel, the Navy Secretary's removal during an active military engagement, the DOJ cases generating their own counter-filings and their own evidence of potential procedural irregularity, the Iran narrative under pressure from multiple journalistic sources, and now from a comedian who had dinner with the president 12 months ago and still looked at the camera and said, "We did not win." Each individual story, examined alone, might be manageable. Taken together, as a single week's accumulation of pressure, they tell a different story, one about an administration managing extraordinary exposure across too many fronts simultaneously, each one producing its own news cycle, each cycle overlapping with the others, none of them fully resolved before the next one arrives. And Bill Maher, who has been watching American political cycles long enough to have seen this pattern in previous administrations under different parties with different personnel, looked at all of it and reached the conclusion he reached on April 24th. Not with dramatic performance, not with the comedic amplification that would have been the easy choice for a man in his profession, but with the flat delivery of someone who has spent long enough paying careful attention to know when the situation requires precision more than pyrotechnics. He said what the facts were. He said it from a position of established credibility that no purely partisan critic could claim. And Donald Trump, the most practiced media manipulator in American political history, the man who has spent decades converting every form of criticism into content that serves his own narrative, could not find a way to make those 5 sentences go away, because the Strait of Hormuz is either open or it is not, and Maher had simply told everyone which one it was.